Former President Donald Trump has been convicted by a Manhattan jury on all 34 counts of falsifying business records to cover up a sex scandal ahead of the 2016 presidential election. The guilty verdict makes him the first former president ever convicted of a crime. The presiding judge, Juan Merchan, now faces the unprecedented task of sentencing Trump on July 11, just days before Republicans are set to select Trump as their 2024 presidential nominee. The historic verdict is expected to raise a series of legal and political questions in the coming months, and the process could be further complicated if he wins a second presidential term. Trump has already laid the groundwork for his appeal and is poised to leverage the outcome to advance his narrative of victimhood and political persecution. But campaigning under the shadow of a criminal conviction is uncharted territory for presidential politics. So what happens now that Trump has been convicted? Will he be sent to prison? Can he appeal? Can he even vote for himself in the November election? We're going to answer your questions. Can Trump still run for president? Yes, even with a conviction, Donald Trump can still run for president. A felony conviction does not legally prevent someone from running for president, even if they were imprisoned. The Constitution says that all natural-born citizens who are at least 35 years old and have been a resident of the U.S. for 14 years can run for president. Being a felon isn't a disqualifier. History also tells us that candidates with criminal convictions have run for president in the past, albeit unsuccessfully. About 100 years ago, Eugene Debs ran for president while in federal prison as the nominee of the Socialist Party, and he got close to 1 million votes without ever hitting the campaign trail. Another convicted presidential candidate, Lyndon LaRouche, ran for president in every election between 1976 and 2004, including one campaign from prison, but he only got over 26,000 votes. So for Trump, he can continue his campaign even with the conviction. Will Donald Trump go to prison? This is the main question on everyone's mind now that he's been convicted. It's possible, but it's not a certainty. The judge in this case, Juan Merchan, has final discretion in sentencing. And given factors like Trump's age, he's about to turn 78, and his lack of prior convictions, he might avoid prison time. In fact, most first-time offenders in nonviolent cases are often sentenced to probation and fines instead. That being said, it is possible the judge decides to incarcerate Trump. And if he does, it's expected the sentence would be anywhere from 1 to 4 years, either at New York City's Rikers Island or in one of New York's 44 state prisons. But Trump would be no ordinary prisoner. The U.S. Secret Service is required by law to protect former presidents at all times. So the prison would also need to accommodate his Secret Service protective detail. And unlike his other pending criminal cases, Trump would not be able to try to pardon himself of his felony conviction if he's elected president again. And that's because falsifying business records is a state crime, and only the New York governor could pardon him. Ahead of sentencing on July 11, both parties are expected to submit a memo to the judge with sentencing recommendations. Trump will be able to gather character letters from friends, family members, and colleagues, and he'll also likely do a pre-sentence interview with a psychologist or a social worker in which he can try to make a good impression and explain why he deserves a lighter punishment. But until sentencing on July 11, Trump remains free. Can Trump appeal the guilty verdict, and how long will an appeal take? Donald Trump almost immediately vowed to appeal the guilty verdict, and that process could take months to play out. It would likely begin at the appellate division in Manhattan and could eventually reach the Court of Appeals in Albany. It's hard to say how long that would take, but given the significance of the case, it's possible that the appeals process wraps up after Election Day. Can Trump still vote? So we know that Trump can still run for president with a felony conviction, but can he vote for himself as a convicted felon? Well, it depends. For Trump to lose his voting rights, he would need to actually be in prison at the time of the November election. And like I said earlier, it is possible that the judge hands him a prison sentence, but if his appeal takes longer than 6 months, then he'll be able to vote. Now, the Constitution does not address whether convicted felons have the right to vote, but several states impose limitations on their voting privileges. In Florida, where Trump lives and has voted since 2020, a felon's eligibility to vote depends on the laws of the state where the conviction occurred, which in this instance is New York, which only revokes a felon's voting rights while they are incarcerated. So if Trump receives a probationary sentence, he would maintain his eligibility to vote. The only way he wouldn't is if he were in prison at the time of the election. So what would a conviction in the hush money case mean for Trump's 3 federal cases? Well, first, let me give some background. Trump is facing 40 felony counts in Florida for allegedly hoarding classified documents and obstructing the government's efforts to retrieve them, as well as 4 counts in Washington related to his alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election, and 13 counts in Georgia, in connection to his alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election result in that state. While the conviction in the hush money trial does not directly impact Trump's other cases, it could significantly influence his legal strategy and public perception. The guilty verdict could embolden prosecutors, it could affect jury perceptions, and potentially impact whether he's willing to negotiate a plea deal or settlement agreement in those cases, or if he's willing to take the stand in those trials. It might also undermine Trump's credibility in future trials, and it's possible judges may take the conviction into consideration when determining sentencing. Ultimately, we don't know what impact the conviction will have, but it is possible that it influences his legal defense in his other cases and shapes the public's perception of his legal troubles.